Emily, little love, see, here's Master Davy. Why, not a word to him?
Oh, Davy.
Oh, that's such a loving heart, it can't bear the sorrow of this. It's getting late, my dear, and Ham's got to take you home.
No, Uncle, let me stay with you.
Stay with your Uncle Moppet? When your husband's soon to be is here for to take you home?
No, Ham's in the right. As she wish it. I'll leave it till morning. Emily, good night, my dear.
Goodbye, Ham.
Oh, only good night, my dear.
Now, we're going upstairs, Emily, to tell your aunt as Master Davy's here, and that will cheer her up a bit.
Let me come with you.
Come with...
Please.
Oh, Master Davy, if her uncle will turn out of house and home, that's my belief she'd go along with him. But there'll be someone else soon. Someone else, Emily. I'll come you up, Master Davy.
Barkis, my dear. Here's my dear boy, Master Davy, what brought us together, that you sent messages by. Wouldn't you speak to Master Davy?
He's going out with the tide.
With the tide?
Huh. People can't die along the coast, except when the tide's pretty nigh out.
Does all the cooking, do she?
You listen. He's come to himself.
I'll take you to Yarmouth for the couch.
He's a-going out fast.
Barkis, my dear.
C.P. Barkis. No better woman anywhere.
Look, here's Master Davy.
Barkis is willing.
And, it being low water, he went out with the tide. The funeral, 1 week after his death, was very quiet. When it was over, Peggotty went back to the barge with her brother. We were all to meet there that night, and the following day she was to come with me to London to see about the will. I walked back to the barge, alone. The night fell wild with rain and storm, and the sea ran high. Ham and Emily had not yet come back, but Peggotty sat in her old place, looking, but for her black dress, as if she'd never left it.
You're the first, Master Davy. Sit you down, sir. You're welcome, kind and hearty.
Thank you. I'm sure of that. Well, Peggotty, dear, how are you?
I miss him, Master Davy. That's the truth.
Oh, save us. Save us.
Oh, cheer up, Mrs. Gummidge. Cheer up, my pretty mother. Cheer up only a little bit and see if a good deal more don't come natural.
Oh, not to me, Dan. Nothing's natural to me but to be lone and lone.
No.
Things go too contrary with me. I better go and be a riddance.
Why don't I want you more now than I ever did?
Oh, how could I expect to be wanted being so lone and lord and so contrary?
Why, mother, how can you think?
Hush, Donald. Leave her be.
Here, give me the candle, Clara.
Oh, here it is.
Thank you. There we are, Mrs. Gummidge. Light it up according to custom. Now, you're wondering what's that for, sir. Well, that's for our little Emily. You see, the path ain't over light and cheerful after dark. When I'm here at the hour she's coming home, I puts the light in the window. And I know after she's married and gone, I shall still put the candle in the window and sit before the fire, pretending I'm expecting of her. Now, when I see it, I say to myself, she's a-looking at it. Emily's a-coming. Oh, right for all that, for here she... Ham? Where's Emily?
Mass Davy.
Yes?
Will you come out a minute and see what Emily and me has got to show you?
Why, yes. What is it, Ham? Where's Emily?
Master Davy!
Ham! For heaven's sake, what's the matter?
My love, Master Davy, the pride and hope of my heart, her that I'd have died for. She's gone.
Gone?
Emily's run away. Oh, Master Davy, think how she's run away. I pray our good and gracious God to kill her that's so dear to me, sooner than let her come to ruin and disgrace.
Ham!
You're a scholar. You know what's right and best. What am I to say to him? How am I ever to break it to him?
Right, what? What you got there?
It's a letter.
From Emily?
Yeah.
Give it me. No!
Mr. Peggotty!
Take it. Read it. Read it to me slow. I don't know as I can understand.
When you, who love me so much better than I have ever deserved, even when my mind was innocent, see this.
See this. I shall be far away. When I leave my home, my dear home, it will be never to come back unless he bring me back a lady. Pray heaven that I am going away from have compassion on my uncle. Tell him that I never loved him half so dear. Be his comfort. Love some good girl that will be what I once was to uncle, and be true to you, and worthy of you, and know no shame but me. God bless all. If he don't bring me back a lady, and I don't pray for my own self, I'll pray for all. My parting love to uncle. My last tears.
And
and
my
my
last
last
thanks for Uncle. That's all. Mr. Peggotty,
I thank you, sir. I thank you. Who's the man? I want to know his name. There's a man suspected. Who is it?
Master Davy, go away a bit and let me tell him what I must. No, you don't ought to hear it, sir.
I want to know his name!
There's been a servant about here at odd times. There's been a gentleman too. Both of them belong to each other. The servant was seen along with a poor girl last night. He's been in hiding about here this week or more. No, never stay, Master Davy, no, don't! A strange shay and horses was in Yarmouth this morning. The servant went to it. Emily was nigh him. T'other was inside. He's the man.
For the Lord's love, don't tell me his name is Steerforth.
His name is Steerforth. And he's a damn villain!
Give me my coat. Oh, bear a hand. I'm struck all of a heap and I can't do it.
There, Uncle. No.
Bear a hand and help me.
Oh, Daniel, my poor Daniel.
Where are you going?
I'm going to see my niece. I'm a-going to see my Emily. And I'm a-going first to stave in that there boat and sink it where I would have drowned him, as I'm a living soul if I'd had one thought of what was in him.
Oh, Uncle.
Strike me down dead, but I'd have drowned him and thought it right. I'm going to seek my niece.
Where?
Anywhere. I'm a-going to seek my niece through the world. I'm going to find my poor Emily in her shame and bring her back.
No.
No one stop me.
No, Daniel. Not as you are now. Seek her in a little while, my lone Daniel, but not as you are now. Sit you down and give me your forgiveness for having ever been a worry to you.
Oh, Mother, I can't.
What of my contraries ever been to this? And let us speak a word about them times when she was first an orphan and Ham was too, and when I was a poor widow woman and you took me in. Eh? That'll soften your poor heart, Daniel, and you'll bear your sorrow better. But you know the promise. As you've done it under one of the least of these, you've done it unto me. Well, that can never fail under this roof. Been our shelter for so many, many years. Hey.
When I heard him crying, my overcharged heart found the same relief, and I cried too. And yet, deeply as I felt my own part in all this, distressed as I was at the discovery of his unworthiness, I had never loved Steerforth better than when the ties that bound me to him were thus broken. All was at an end between us. But if I had been brought face to face with him, I could not have uttered one reproach. Yes, Steerforth, my sorrow might bear witness against you at the judgment throne. My anger never will. The news spread quickly through the town, and for Mr. Peggotty and Ham, there was but one feeling: respect for their distress. It was on the beach down close to the sea that I found them.
We've had a more to talk, sir, of what we ought to do, but we see our course now. I'm going to seek her. That's my duty evermore.
Where will you look?
I don't know yet, but if you're agreeable, I'll go along you to London tomorrow.
Certainly.
Ham will hold to his present work and go and live along with my sister. And the old boat...
Will you desert it?
No, sir. If ever she should come a-wandering back, I wouldn't have the old place seem to cast her off, but to look as it's always looked, to tempt her, to draw nigh, and peep in, and then maybe, seeing none but Mrs. Gummidge there, she might take heart to creep in and rest her weary head. Every night a candle must be stood there, and if ever she should see it, it may seem to say, "Come back, my child. Come back."
Next morning we set out for London, and Ham came to the coach station to take leave of us. Before I took my place beside Mr. Peggotty, Ham drew me aside.
Master Davy, his life is quite broke up. He don't know what's afore him. He's bound upon a voyage that'll last the rest of his days, unless he find what he's seeking. I'm sure I'll be a friend to him.
Trust me. I will indeed.
Well, thank you, very kind. One thing more. I'm in the good employ now, and I hadn't no way of spending what I get. Money's no use to me no more, except to live. If you can lay it out for him, I should do my work with a better heart.
I'll do what you wish, Ham, but it may be that in time, your own life will be less lonely.
No, sir. All that's past and over. No one can never fill the place what's empty.
Our journey was not a happy one. How could it be? Mr. Peggotty sat silent, and I could not speak either. I had too many memories.
I'd like to be a lady. Oh, yes. I'd like it very much. We'd all be gentlefolk together then. Me and Uncle and Ham and Mrs. Gummidge.
You haven't got a sister, have you, Copperfield? If you had, I should think she'd have been a pretty, timid, little bright-eyed sort of girl. I should have liked to know her.
Your friend, is he very handsome?
Look at Emily. She's like me. She'd like to see him.
Daisy, if anything should ever separate us, you must think of me at my best.
When I leave my home, my dear home, it will be never to come back, unless he bring me back a lady. Never to come back, never to come back, never to come back, never to come back.
Mr. Peggotty's first purpose in coming to London was to see Mrs. Steerforth. When she received us, I saw in her face that she already knew. Rosa Dartle stood behind her chair.
Sit down, Mr. Peggotty.
No, ma'am. I shouldn't feel it natural to sit down in this here house. I'd sooner stand.
I know with deep regret what has brought you here. What do you want of me?
Please to read that, ma'am. That's my niece's hand.
Well?
Unless he bring me back a lady. That's what she said. I come to know, ma'am, whether he will keep his word.
No.
Why not?
It is impossible. He would disgrace himself. You can't fail to know that she's far below him.
Then raise her up.
She is uneducated and ignorant.
I think not, ma'am. But I'm no judge of them things. You can teach her better.
Her humble connections would make such a thing impossible, if nothing else.
Now, hark to this, ma'am. If she were 100 times my child, I couldn't love her more. You don't know what that is to lose your child. I do. All the riches in the world, if they was mine, would be nowt to me to buy her back. But save her from this disgrace, and she'll never be disgraced by us. We'll be content to let her be. We'll be content to think of her far off, as if she were under another sun and sky. We'll be content to trust her to her husband, and to her little children, perhaps, and bide the time when all of us shall be alike in quality afore our God.
Such a marriage would blight my son's career. It can never take place, and it never will. If there is any other compensation?
I am looking at the likeness of the face that has looked at me in my home, at my fireside, smiling and friendly when it was so treacherous that I go half wild when I think of it. If the likeness of that face don't turn to burning fire at the thought of offering money to me for my child's ruin, that's as bad. I don't know being a lady's, but what it's worse.
What compensation can you make to me for opening such a pit between me and my son? What is your love to mine? What is your separation to ours?
Calm yourself.
No, Rosa, let him listen. My son, who has been the object of my life, to take up in a moment with a miserable girl and quit me for her, to set this wretched fancy against his mother's claims on his duty, love, respect, gratitude? Is this no injury?
Please do not.
Not a word, Rosa. Let James go where he will, with the means my love has secured to him. If he thinks to reduce me by long absence, he does not know his mother. Let him put away his whim now, and he is welcome back. Let him not put her away now, and he shall never come near me, living or dying, unless, being rid of her for ever, he comes humbly to me and begs for my forgiveness. This is my right. This is the separation that there is between us. And is this no injury? Mr. Copperfield, let us end this interview. There is no more to say.
And I have no more to say, ma'am. I come here with no hope, and I take away no hope. I've done what I thought should be done, but I never looked for any good to come of my standing where I do. This has been too evil a house for me and mine for me to expect it. Master Davy?
Yes. Goodbye, Mrs. Steerforth.
Mr. Copperfield.
I'll wait for you outside, sir.
You do well to bring that fellow here.
Miss Dartle, he is a deeply injured man. You may not know it, but...
I know that James Steerforth has a false, corrupt heart and is a traitor. But what do I know or care about this fellow and his common niece?
You deepen the injury and you do him a great wrong.
I do him no wrong. They're a depraved, worthless set. I would have her whipped.
For shame, Miss Dartle!
I would have his house pulled down. I'd have her branded on the face, dressed in rags, and cast out on the streets to starve. If I had the power to sit in judgment on her, I'd see it done. See it done, I would do it. I detest her. If I could hunt her to her grave, I would. If there were any word of comfort that would be a solace to her in her dying hour, and only I possessed it, I wouldn't part with it for life itself.
I have seen passion in many forms, but never in such a form as that. Mr. Peggotty set off on his travels that very night. I stood with his sister and watched him till he turned the corner of the street, and we lost him.
I'm a-going to seek her, far and wide. If any hurt should come to me, remember the last words I left for her were, "My unchanged love is with my darling child, and I forgive her."
And now I had to turn my mind to Peggotty's affairs. I took them into my own hands with no little pride. I proved the will and got everything in order. When all was settled, I took her to the office to pay her bill. Mr. Spenlow had gone out to get a gentleman sworn for a marriage licence, but was expected back soon. We had only a few minutes to wait, but when he returned, neither Peggotty nor I had eyes for him. For the gentleman who was to be married was an old acquaintance.
Copperfield, you know Mr. Murdstone, I believe?
I do.
Mr. Spenlow? One moment. Excuse me, sir.
Certainly. Copperfield, I hope you're doing well.
It can hardly be interesting to you, but yes, if you wish to know.
And you, Mrs. Marcus?
Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that you have lost your husband.
That's not the first loss I've had in my life, Mr. Murdstone. I'm glad that there's nobody to blame for this one. Nobody to answer for it.
That's a comfortable reflection. You have done your duty?
I'm thankful to think I haven't worn anybody's life away. No, Mr. Murdstone, I've not worrited and frightened any sweet creature to an early grave.
Copperfield.
Yes?
We're not likely to meet again soon. A source of satisfaction to us both, no doubt. You always rebelled against my just authority, exerted for your good, so I don't expect that you should owe me any goodwill now. There's an antipathy between us.
An old one?
Yes. It rankled in your childish heart. It embittered the life of your poor mother. I hope you may do better yet. I hope you may correct yourself. Ah, Mr. Spenlow.
Sir.
Our gentlemen of your profession are accustomed to family differences and know how difficult they always are. That is the correct sum, I believe.
Quite correct, sir, thank you. Your licence?
Thank you. Good day to you. Good day, Mr. Copperfield.
Yes, I believe this is to be rather a good marriage.
Do you mean there is money in it, sir?
Yes, I understand there's money. Beauty, too, I'm told.
Indeed. Is his new wife young?
Just of age. So lately that I should think they'd been waiting for that.
May the Lord deliver her.
I beg your pardon?
Mr. Spenlow's, Mrs. Barkis's account.
Ah, thank you. Yes, that's right. Quite right. Here you are, Copperfield. I should have been extremely happy to have limited these charges to the actual expenditure out of pocket, but it's an irksome incident in my professional life that I am not at liberty to consult my own wishes. I have a partner,
Mr. Jorkins.
Mr. Jorkins, yes, quite so. One thing more.
Yes, Mr. Spenlow?
It is my daughter Dora's birthday in 1 week's time.
Yes?
We are having a picnic to celebrate the occasion. Would you care to join us?
Would I care to... Yes, Mr. Spenlow. Thank you. I would indeed.
I passed the intervening period in a state of dotage, heightened by the receipt next day of a little lace-edged sheet of notepaper, favoured by Papa, to remind. I turn hot when I remember the cravat I bought. My boots might be placed in any collection of instruments of torture. I hired a gallant grey horse for the occasion. I sent down, the day before, a delicate little hamper, almost a declaration in itself, and I arrived in Mr. Spenlow's garden, carrying a bouquet specially purchased that morning at Covent Garden. It was a beautiful day, and the most beautiful thing in it was Dora, sitting on a garden seat among the butterflies, in a white bonnet and a dress of celestial blue.
Good morning, Mr. Copperfield.
Miss Spenlow, allow me to give you... Oh, they match your dress. And your eyes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Copperfield. What dear flowers. Smell them, Jip. Oh, you naughty dog. To bite my poor, beautiful flowers. Mr. Copperfield, this is my friend, Miss Mills. Cross Miss Murdstone isn't here. She's gone to her brother's wedding and she'll be away 3 weeks. Isn't that delightful?
Yes.
You can't believe how disagreeable she is, Julia.
Oh, yes, I can, my dear. Life has not always been kind, remember?
Yes, Julia, forgive me.
I learned afterwards that Miss Mills had lately been disappointed in love and was consequently regarded with compassionate respect as a blighted flower. I don't know to this hour where we all went. Perhaps some Arabian Nights magician opened the place for us and shut it up forever when we came away. It was a green spot on a hill, shady trees and heather. There were, unfortunately, many other people there.
We need a wine cellar. Ah, and there's a capital cellar here in that hollow tree trunk. Pass me the bottles.
One of them I hated, a red-whiskered impostor, 3 or 4 years older than me.
I've done this sort of thing before, you know. And, by the way, I make a capital salad.
Do you really, Mr. Robbins?
Indeed I do, Miss Spenlow. But you ladies must help me. I demand that you slice the cucumbers with your own fair hands.
He was an ingenious beast. He made his salad. Nothing would have induced me to touch it. And then he had the impertinence to eat his dinner at Dora's feet.
My dear Miss Spenlow, I drink your health.
I attached myself in my misery to a young creature in pink with little eyes and flirted with her desperately.
Oh, Mr. Copperfield, I don't believe a word you say.
I assure you, I am sincerity itself.
Clarissa, come here.
Yes, Mamma.
So now I was alone, and more miserable than ever. I wandered off into the woods, and I was contemplating flight on my gallant grey, when Dora and Miss Mills met me.
Mr. Copperfield.
Yes?
You are dull.
Not at all.
And Dora.
Yes?
You are dull.
No, Julia, not in the least.
Oh, come. Enough of this. Do not allow a trivial misunderstanding to wither the blossoms of spring.
Dora, where are you?
Coming, Papa. Forgive me, Mr. Copperfield. I will come back.
Mr. Copperfield?
Yes?
Dora is coming to stay with me the day after tomorrow. If you would care to call, I'm sure my papa would be most happy to meet you.
Why, thank you.
Dora did come back, and I went straight up to 7th heaven. We strayed among the trees, with Dora's shy arm through mine, and when she sang, it seemed that she was singing only to me. 2 days passed, very slowly, and I called upon Miss Mills. I was resolute to declare my passion, if opportunity offered.
Mr. Copperfield, I'm very glad to see you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Copperfield.
Good afternoon, Miss Mills. Miss Spenlow.
I'm afraid Papa is out, but would you care to take tea with us?
Thank you, Miss Mills. How kind of you.
I will arrange it.
I hope your poor horse wasn't tired when he got home. It was such a long way for him.
It was a long way for him, for he had nothing to uphold him on the journey.
Wasn't he fed, poor thing?
I mean, he hadn't the unutterable happiness I had.
What was that?
The happiness of being near you.
Oh? You didn't seem very sensible of it when you were sitting by Miss Kit.
Miss Kit?
The young lady in pink. But why shouldn't you sit by Miss Kit if you want to? You're at liberty to do whatever you like.
No, I'll never be at liberty again. Miss Spenlow, Dora, I love you so much.
Mr. Copperfield.
I'd die without you. I'd die for you if you wanted me to. I've loved you from the first moment I saw you. I love you to distraction. No one has ever loved as much as I love you. Oh, Miss Spenlow, Dora, dearest Dora, have I any hope? I shall die if you say no.
Yes.
I cannot live without you. What did you say?
I said yes.
Oh, my dearest girl.
Mr. Copperfield.
Yes?
Dora?
Yes.
Well?
Yes.
God bless you. God bless you both. Oh, forgive me. This reawakens painful memories. Dora, Mr. Copperfield, a happier future awaits you.
But we can't get married without Papa's consent.
Of course not, my darling. Shall I go and see him?
No, not yet. He might not quite like it. He'll say we're both too young or some such tiresome thing.
Oh, yes. Perhaps he may.
We must keep our engagement secret for a little while.
A secret engagement? Oh, youth. Youth.
I walked on air. We held secret meetings. I measured Dora's finger for a ring, a pretty little toy made of forget-me-nots. And we arranged a plan of correspondence through Miss Mills to comprehend at least one letter on each side every day. What an idle time. What an insubstantial, happy, foolish time. There is no other that in retrospect I can smile at half so much and think of half so tenderly.
My dear Traddles, come in. I'm delighted to see you at last. I heard you'd called, but I've been so much engaged.
Yes, I know.
What did you say?
Yours lives in London, I think. Miss D, you know? She lives in London, I believe.
Yes, near London.
Mine, perhaps you recollect, lives in Devonshire, one of 10. Consequently, I'm not so much engaged as you, in that sense.
I wonder that you can bear to see her so seldom.
Yes, it does seem a wonder. I suppose it's because there's no help for it.
I suppose so. And because you're so constant and patient.
Do I strike you that way?
Yes.
Oh, really? I didn't know I was. But she's such a dear girl herself. She may have made me more like her. She's always forgetting herself and taking care of the other 9.
Is she the eldest?
Oh, dear, no. The eldest is a beauty. Not but that my Sophie is beautiful in my eyes and would be one of the dearest girls in the world in anybody's eyes. But when I say the eldest is a beauty, I mean she really is splendid, you know.
Indeed.
So, being formed for society and admiration and not being able to enjoy much of it because of their limited means, she naturally gets a little irritable and exacting sometimes. But Sophie puts her in a good humour.
Is Sophie the youngest?
Oh, dear, no. The 2 youngest are only 9 and 10. Sophie educates them.
Is the mother alive?
Oh, yes, she's alive. She's a very superior woman, but the damp country doesn't suit her. She's lost the use of her limbs. It's very sad. But domestically, it's not so bad as it might be, because Sophie takes her place.
I think I admire your Sophie very much.
Oh, I told you. She's the dearest girl.
And how are your prospects now?
Not very different, I'm afraid.
And how is Mr. Micawber?
Mr. Micawber? Oh, he's quite well, thank you. But I'm not living with him at present.
No?
No. He's changed his name to Mortimer in consequence of his temporary embarrassments, and he don't come out till after dark, and then in spectacles. There was an execution put into our house for rent. Mrs. Micawber was in such a dreadful state that I couldn't resist giving my name to another bill.
Oh, Traddles!
It made me so happy to see the matter settled with it, Copperfield. But unfortunately, within a week, another execution came in and broke up the establishment. I've been living in a furnished apartment since, and the, Mortimers have been very private indeed.
When Peggotty came back with me to my chambers, we were both very surprised to see that the outer door was open, and more surprised still to find Mrs. Crupp making tea for my aunt and Mr. Dick, who were surrounded by a quantity of luggage.
My dear aunt! What an unexpected pleasure.
I knew as Mr. Copperfield would have his heart in his mouth when he saw his dear relations.
You remember my aunt, Peggotty?
Indeed I do.
Oh, for the love of goodness, child, don't call the woman by that South Sea Island name. If she married and got rid of it, which was the best thing she could do, why don't you give her the benefit of the change? What's your name now? P.
Barkis, ma'am.
Well, that's human. Sounds less as if you wanted a missionary. How do you do, Barkis? I hope you're well.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
We're older than we were, I see. We have only met once before, you know. A nice business we made of it then.
Let me get you a chair, Aunt. You must be uncomfortable sitting on that box.
Thank you, Trot. I prefer to sit on my own property. We needn't trouble you to wait, Mrs. Crupp.
Oh, shall I put a little more tea in a pot before I go, Mum?
No, thank you.
Oh, would you let me fetch another pout butter, Mum?
No.
Or would you be persuaded to try a new laid egg?
Nothing, thank you.
Ain't there nothing I could do for your dear aunt, Mr. Copperfield?
I said nothing.
Very well, Mum. Oh, pleasure to see you, Mum.
Dick.
Yes, Miss Trotwood?
You know what I told you about time servers and wealth worshippers? Mrs. Crupp is one of them. Barkis, I'll trouble you to look after the tea. I don't fancy that woman's pouring out.
Yes, ma'am. That'll be a pleasure.
Thank you. Now, Trot.
Yes, Aunt?
Are you firm and self-reliant now?
I hope so.
Then why do you suppose I prefer to sit on this property of mine tonight?
I don't know.
Because it's all I have. I'm ruined, my dear.
What?
Dick knows it.
Oh, yes. Ruined.
All I have in the world is in this room, and I've left Janet to let the cottage. Barkis, I want a bed for this gentleman tonight.
Very well, ma'am.
To save expense, perhaps you could make up something here for me. Anything will do. We'll talk about this more tomorrow. Oh, Trot. My dear Trot.
Oh, Betsy.
I only grieve for you. But we must live misfortune down.
Did you say he's to stay at the Chandler's place, Mr. Copperfield?
Yes, Mrs. Crupp. I'm sure there's a bed there that will suit this gentleman. Hey, Mr. Dick?
Oh, yes.
There ain't room to swing a cat there. That there ain't.
But I don't want to swing a cat, Trotwood. I never do swing a cat. So what does that matter?
Not at all, I'm sure. But, Mr. Dick, before my aunt comes back, tell me, what has happened?
Well, Trotwood, 2 days ago your aunt asked me if I were the philosopher she took me for, and I said, I hope so. So she told me she was ruined.
What did you say?
I said, indeed. And she was pleased with me. So then we came to London and had porter and sandwiches on the road.
Do you know what ruin means, Mr. Dick?
Why, yes. It means... It means ruin, don't it?
It means distress, want, and starvation.
But I thought... Your aunt is such a wonderful woman... And you're a scholar. I thought... Distress and starvation. Oh, dear.
What can we do?
Oh, there's the memorial.
Of course there is. But all we can do just now is look cheerful and not let my aunt know we're thinking about it.
My aunt's composure was a lesson to us all. She was to have my bed, and a bed was made up for me in the sitting room. I started to make up her usual nightcap for her, but she stopped me.
No trot, my dear. Not wine.
But you always have wine.
Not wine now. Ale. Half a pint.
But there's wine here.
Keep it in case of sickness. We must use it carefully.
Aunt.
Child, if nothing worse than ale happens to us, we're well off. Trot, I don't care for strange faces in general, but I rather like that Barkis of yours. She's uncommonly fond of you.
There's nothing she wouldn't do to prove it.
I believe you. The poor fool's been begging to hand over some of her money because she's got too much of it. She's the most ridiculous creature that ever was born. But there are good points in Barkis. We had quite a gossip while you took Mr. Dick to his lodgings.
Did you?
Yes. I know all about it, you know.
About?
Her niece. Oh, I don't know where these wretched girls expect to go.
Oh, poor Emily.
Don't talk to me about poor. She should have thought of that before she caused so much misery. But enough of that. Barkis tells me you fancy yourself in love.
Fancy? I adore her with my whole soul.
The little thing is very fascinating, no doubt.
No one can have the least idea what she is.
And not silly?
Silly?
Not light-headed?
Light-headed?
Now, I only ask, mind, I don't depreciate her. Poor little couple. So you think you were made for each other and are to go through a party supper table kind of life like two pretty pieces of confectionery.
We're young and inexperienced, I know.
Yes, Trot.
And I dare say we say and think a good deal that's rather foolish, but we love each other truly. If I thought Dora could ever love anyone else or cease to love me, or that I could love anyone else or cease to love her, I think I'd go out of my mind.
Trot. Blind, blind, blind. But I don't want to make two young creatures unhappy. So, though it's a girl and boy attachment, and they often, I don't say always, come to nothing, still we'll be serious about it and hope for a prosperous issue one of these days. There's time enough for it to come to anything.
How are you, Copperfield? Fine day.
A beautiful morning, sir. Could I say a word to you before you go into court?
By all means.
I'm sorry to say I've had bad news from my aunt.
Tell me. Not paralysis, I hope.
No. It's not her health, sir. She's met with some large losses. In fact, she has very little left.
You astound me.
Indeed, sir. Her affairs are so changed. I wanted to ask you whether it would be possible, at a sacrifice on our part of some portion of the premium, of course, to cancel my articles.
Cancel your articles?
You see, though I've no fear of the future, as things are now, I don't know what means I shall have unless I earn them for myself.
I'm extremely sorry to hear this. It isn't usual to cancel articles for any such reason. It is not professional. It is not a convenient precedent. Far from it. At the same time...
Oh, you're very good, sir.
Not at all. Don't thank me. I was going to say that at the same time, if I had not a partner...
Oh, do you think if I were to mention it to Mr. Jorkins, would you object?
By no means, if you think it worthwhile.
You have mentioned this to Mr. Spenlow?
Yes, sir.
And he said I should object?
He considered it probable.
Well, I'm sorry to say I can't agree. Forgive me, I have an appointment at the bank.
Then there's no way of arranging the matter?
No, I object, you know. If Mr. Spenlow objects...
Personally, he doesn't object.
Oh, personally. I assure you there is an objection. I really have got an appointment at the bank.
I left in a state of despondency, and was walking home when a hackney carriage stopped beside me. The passenger looked out, and I saw the face I'd never seen without a renewed feeling of security and happiness.
Agnes! Of all the people in the world, what a pleasure to see you. If I were a magician, there's no one else I could have wished for.
Oh, indeed. I did get your letter, you know.
Oh, well, perhaps Dora first.
Certainly Dora first, I hope.
Dora first, but you next. Where are you going?
To see your aunt in your chambers. Are you going home?
Yes.
Then you'd better get in. Drive on, please.
Has my aunt told you what's happened?
She wrote me a note to tell me of the change in her fortunes. Papa is in London with Uriah Heep, so I came up with them.
So they're partners now. Confound him.
Yes. They have business here, and I don't like to let Papa go anywhere alone with Uriah.
Has he the same influence on your father?
Yes. There is such a change at home you'd scarcely know the dear old house. They live with us now.
They?
Mr. Heep and his mother. He sleeps in your old room.
I wish I had the ordering of his dreams. He wouldn't sleep there long.
I keep my own little room. You remember? The little panelled room.
Where I first saw you.
It's just the same. We were very happy, weren't we?
We were indeed.
The chief evil of their presence in the house is that I can't be as near Papa as I could wish. I can't watch over him as closely as I'd like. Trotwood?
Yes?
Did your aunt tell you how her money was lost?
No, she hasn't told me.
I see.
You tried to cancel your articles? You shouldn't have done that, Trot. Oh, but you're a generous boy, and I'm proud of you. Now, both of you, let us look the case of Betsy Trotwood in the face and see how it stands. Agnes, sit down, my dear. Well, Betsy Trotwood had a certain property, enough to live on, more, for she'd saved a little. On the advice of her man of business, she laid it out on landed security. That did very well and returned very good interest, till Betsy was paid off and she had to look about her for a new investment.
Yes.
She thought she was wiser than her man of business, who wasn't such a good man of business as he used to be. I mean, your father, Agnes.
I see.
So she took it into her head to lay it out for herself. She took her pigs to a foreign market, and a very bad market it turned out to be. The bank was at the other end of the world and tumbled into space, for all I know.
My dear Miss Trotwood.
Anyhow, it fell to pieces and never will and never can pay sixpence. And Betsy's sixpences were all there, and there's an end of this. Least said, soonest mended.
Is that the end of the story?
I hope it's enough, child. Except, and she lived happily ever afterwards. Perhaps I may add that one day. But how can Trot and I do best on our means? What do you say, Agnes?
I've been thinking, Trotwood, that if you had time to spare...
Well, yes. I'm always disengaged after 4 or 5 o'clock, and I have time early in the morning.
Dr. Strong has retired and come to live in London, and he asked Papa to recommend him a secretary. Well, don't you think he'd rather have his favourite old pupil than anyone else? And I'm sure he'd be generous.
Dear Agnes, you're always my good angel. I shall write to him at once.
I think that's Papa. He promised me he'd come.
Oh. Good afternoon, Mr. Wickfield. And Uriah.
Master Copperfield?
Come in.
Well, Wickfield, I've been telling your daughter how well I've disposed of my money for myself. We've been getting on very well. Agnes is worth the whole firm, in my opinion.
If I may humbly make the remark, I fully agree. I should be only too happy if Miss Agnes was a partner.
You're a partner yourself, and that's enough for you, I expect. How do you find yourself, sir?
Pretty well, thank you, ma'am. I hope you're the same, and Master, I should say, Mr. Copperfield, I hope I see you well. I am rejoiced to see you, even under present circumstances. Present circumstances is not what your friends would wish for you. But it isn't money makes the man. And how do you think we are looking, Mr. Copperfield? Don't you find Mr. Wickfield blooming? Years don't tell much in our firm, Mr. Copperfield, except in raising up the humble, namely mother and self, and developing the beautiful, namely Miss Agnes.
Deuce take the man, what's he about? If you're an eel, sir, conduct yourself like one. If you're a man, control your limbs. Good God! I'm not going to be serpentined and corkscrewed out of my senses.
I am well aware, Master Copperfield, that Miss Trotwood, though an excellent lady, has a quick temper, and it's only natural it should be made quicker by present circumstances.
Yes.
I only call to say that if there was anything we could do in present circumstances, Mother and self, or Wickfield and Heep, we should be really glad. I may go so far, Mr. Wickfield?
Uriah Heep is active in the business.
Oh.
What he says, I quite concur in.
Oh, what a reward it is to be so trusted in. But I hope I am able to do something to relieve him from the fatigues of business, Master Copperfield.
Uriah Heep is a great relief to me. It is a load off my mind to have him as a partner.
Well, I am bespoke myself this evening, otherwise I should have been happy to have kept with my friend. But I leave my partner to represent the firm. Miss Agnes, ever yours. I wish you good day, Master Copperfield, and leave my humble respects for Miss Betsy Trotwood.
On this he retired, kissing his great hand and leering at us like a mask. Mr. Wickfield, left alone, became more like his old self, though there was a settled depression on him which he never shook off. He invited me to dine with them at their lodgings. After dinner, Agnes sat beside her father, as of old, and poured out his wine. He took what she gave and no more, like a child.
Papa?
Oh, thank you, Agnes. Thank you, my child.
You look tired. You should rest a little now. Come.
Perhaps I should. Thank you, my dear. Will you play for us?
If Trotwood doesn't mind.
I should like it above all things.
Softly now the light of day.
He lay down on a sofa. It was almost dark, but not too dark to see tears glittering in his daughter's eyes. I pray heaven that I never will forget her in her love and truth at that time.
Free, Lord, I would commune with thee.
Oh, Agnes, sister of my boyhood, if only I had known then what I knew long after. My misfortunes were still real enough, but my meeting with Agnes had quite changed my attitude to them. I now saw my troubles as challenges to be overcome. I must take my woodman's axe in my hand, clear my way through the forest of difficulties, and win my prize. And my prize was Dora. Dr. Strong had responded very swiftly to my letter, and I was to see him at his house in Highgate at 10 o'clock in the morning.
My dear Copperfield, your proposal is very gratifying and agreeable to me, but don't you think you could do better? You achieved distinction, you know, when you were with us.
Doctor, if you'll take such time as I have and think it worth £70 a year, you'll do me a great service.
Will I? Will I indeed? Then you must promise me that when you can do better, you will. On your word now.
On my word, sir. Then we are agreed?
We are agreed.
Thank you. Sir, I remember you'd started researching your dictionary while I was still at school. Am I to have the pleasure of working on that?
You've hit it. Yes, it is my dictionary. You may find my papers are not quite in order. Mr. Jack Malden has been helping me, and he isn't used to such work. You remember Mr. Malden, my wife Annie's cousin?
Indeed I do. Then he's come back from India?
Yes. He couldn't bear the climate, you know. Mrs. Markland was quite vexed about him, poor thing. So we've got him at home again. And we've bought him a little patent place, which agrees with him much better.
I enjoyed my work with Dr. Strong. And although I was kept pretty busy, up at 5 in the morning and home at 9 or 10 at night, I felt that the more I tired myself out, the more I was doing to deserve Dora. Indeed, I still burned with impatience to do more, and in pursuit of this, I went to see Traddles. I had heard that many distinguished men began life by reporting the debates in Parliament, and I wanted to know how to set about it.
My dear Copperfield, this is an undertaking. It requires a mastery of shorthand.
How long would that take?
Several years, I shouldn't wonder.
Good. I'll begin tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
I'll buy a book and work at it in the office. I'll take down the speeches in court for practice. I'll master it, Traddles.
Why? I'd no idea you were such a determined character. I'm very glad to see you, Copperfield. I have a letter for you from Mr. Micawber, sent care of me.
How is he?
Pretty well, I think, but his letter will tell you. Here.
Thank you. What? Listen to this. You may possibly not be unprepared to receive the intimation that something has turned up. Traddles, at last. Can this be true?
Read the rest of it.
I may have mentioned to you that I expected such an event
to occur. And now I am about to establish myself in one of the provincial towns of our favoured island in immediate connection with one of the learned professions. Mrs. Micawber and our offspring will accompany me. In bidding adieu to the modern Babylon, where we have undergone many vicissitudes, I trust, not ignobly, Mrs. Micawber and myself cannot forget that we part, it may be for years, and it may be for ever, with an individual linked by strong associations to the altar of our domestic life. If, on the eve of such a departure, you will accompany our mutual friend Mr. Thomas Traddles to our present abode, and there reciprocate the wishes natural to the occasion, you will confer a boon on one who is forever yours, Wilkins Micawber. My dear Copperfield, you and Mr. Traddles find us on the brink of migration, and will excuse any little discomforts incidental to that position.
Of course. Congratulations to both.
Dear Mr. Copperfield, thank you. My family may consider it banishment if they please, but I am a wife and mother, and I will never desert Mr. Micawber.
Oh, I'm sure of that, Mum.
Thank you, Mr. Traddles. That is my view of the obligation I took upon myself when I repeated the irrevocable words, I, Emma, take thee, Wilkins. The conclusion I reached was that I never could desert Mr. Micawber, and though it is possible I may be mistaken in my view at the ceremony, I never will.
My dear, I'm not conscious that you're expected to do anything of the kind.
I am aware, my dear Mr. Copperfield, that I am now about to cast my lot among strangers, and I am also aware that my family, to whom Mr. Micawber has written in the most gentlemanly terms announcing that fact, have not taken the least notice of it.
Oh.
I may augur from their silence that they object to the resolution I have taken, but I should not allow myself to be swerved from the path of duty, even by Papa and Mamma, were they still living. It may be a sacrifice to immure oneself in a cathedral town.
Oh, you're going to a cathedral town.
To Canterbury. In fact, my dear Copperfield, I am contracted to our friend Heep to serve him in the capacity of, and to be, his confidential clerk.
To Uriah Heep?
Yes. On Mrs. Micawber's suggestion, an advertisement was placed by me, and our friend Heep responded to it. Our friend Heep is a man of remarkable shrewdness, and I desire to speak of him with all possible respect. He has not fixed the positive remuneration at too high a figure, but he has made a great deal in the way of extrication from pecuniary difficulties contingent on the value of my services. On the value of those services I pin my faith. I have already some acquaintance with the law as a defendant on civil process.
I particularly wish Mr. Micawber to be careful that he does not, in applying himself to this subordinate branch of the law, place it out of his power to rise ultimately to the top of the tree. I am convinced that Mr. Micawber, giving his mind to a profession so adapted to his fertile resources and his flow of language, must distinguish himself. Now, for example, Mr. Traddles, a judge or even a chancellor Does an individual place himself beyond the pale of those preferments by entering on such an office as Mr. Micawber has accepted?
My dear, we have time enough to consider those questions.
Micawber, no. Your mistake in life is that you do not look forward far enough. You are bound, in justice to your family, if not to yourself, to contemplate the furthest point to which your abilities may lead you. Now, Mr. Traddles.
Why, the plain truth, Mrs. Micawber, the real prosaic fact...
I wish to be prosaic and literal as possible on a subject of such importance.
The real fact is that this branch of the law, even if Mr. Micawber were a regular solicitor, has nothing to do with that.
Oh.
Only a barrister is eligible for such preferments, and Mr. Micawber could not be a barrister without being entered at an Inn of Court as a student for 5 years.
Do I understand, Mr. Traddles, that at the expiration of that period, Mr. Micawber would be eligible as a judge or chancellor?
He would be eligible, yes.
Thank you. That is sufficient. My anxiety is set at rest. I've always been of the opinion that Mr. Micawber possesses the judicial mind, and I hope he is now entering a field where that mind will develop itself and take a commanding station.
My dear, we will not anticipate the decrees of fortune. Copperfield, your glass. Traddles, my friend, your glass.
Thank you, Mr. Micawber. We must drink to your success in your new career.
Indeed we must.
Mr. Micawber and Mrs. Micawber. I propose a toast to your future.
Mr. and
Mrs. Micawber!
Thank you, thank you. Whatever station in society I attain through the learned profession of which I am about to become an unworthy member, I shall endeavour not to disgrace, and Mrs. Micawber will be sure to adorn. On Monday next, on the arrival of the 4 o'clock afternoon coach at Canterbury, my foot will be on my native heath, my name Micawber. Your health. One thing more. On 2 occasions, my friend Mr. Thomas Traddles has put his name to bills of exchange for my accommodation.
Oh, please, don't...
On the first occasion, Mr. Traddles was left, let me say, in short, in the lurch. The fulfilment of the second has not yet arrived. The 2 sums united make a total amounting to £41, 10, 11 and a half. To leave the metropolis without acquitting myself of this obligation would weigh on my mind to an insupportable extent.
Oh, I do assure you it's...
I therefore beg to hand to my friend Mr. Traddles my IOU for 41, 10, 11 and a half. And thus I am happy to recover my moral dignity and to know that I can once more walk erect before my fellow men. Mr. Traddles, I wish you well.
Why, thank you.
And so we parted with great heartiness on both sides. As yet, my beloved Dora knew nothing of my altered circumstances, and I felt I should not announce them by letter. On a particular Saturday, therefore, I arranged to take tea with Dora and Miss Mills, who duly left us alone together. Dora, my darling.
Yes, Dodie.
Tell me, could you ever love a beggar?
Love a beggar? What do you mean? How can you ask me such a silly question?
My dearest, I am a beggar.
Hush, Jip. Now, Dodie, don't sit there telling such stories.
My life. I am your ruined David.
Dodie.
I have no money now. I have no prospects. I'm a poor man. I thought it right to tell you so. My love, if you want to be released from our engagement, I would quite understand... Oh, no, don't cry. Dearest, please, don't cry. Oh, I couldn't bear it if I lost you. If you can face poverty with me, it has no terrors. Is your heart still mine?
Oh, yes. It's all yours.
Oh.
But don't be so dreadful. Don't talk about being poor.
My dearest love, the crust well earned.
I don't want to hear about crusts. Jip must have a mutton chop every day at 12 or he'll die.
He shall have it. I'll work hard for you and we'll have our own little house.
But we must be practical.
Don't talk about being practical. It frightens me.
Sweetheart, you mustn't be alarmed. Perseverance and strength of character will help us bear it.
But I haven't got any strength at all. Have I, Jip? Oh, do kiss Jip and be reasonable.
Jip. But I must ask you, my darling, to think sometimes, not despondently, that you are engaged to a poor man. If you sometimes thought of that and looked now and then at your father's housekeeping...
Housekeeping?
And tried to get used to keeping accounts. And if you promise me to read a little cookery book that I will send you...
Oh, no!
Oh, Dora, my heart, don't. I didn't mean to...
Oh, Mr. Copperfield, what has happened? What have you done? Oh, Dora, dearest, what is the matter?
Daddy wants to buy me a cookery book.
Oh, but Dora...
He said I should learn to keep counts.
Oh! I'm sure he didn't mean it. You didn't, did you, Mr. Copperfield?
Well, no, but I...
You see, he didn't mean it.
Dora, I don't want anything that you don't want. I am so sorry.
Oh, Dodie. I must look such a fright.
No, you look beautiful.
Oh, go and bathe your eyes, dear. Mr. Copperfield has said he's sorry.
Very well. I'm sorry too, Dodie. Truly.
Oh, my own. Miss Mills, I'm so distressed. I never meant to upset her.
No.
But my prospects have suffered a reverse, and I thought I should warn her that she won't be marrying a wealthy man. I only suggested that perhaps, thinking of the future, it might be wise if she
Mr.
was...
Copperfield, I do understand. But we must both remember that dear Dora is not made to face the harsh realities of life. She is a thing of light and joy, and should only know happiness.
And indeed, when Dora returned, she looked so lovely that I could only agree. I loved Dora, and I went on loving her. But I sometimes wondered how I was to cut my way through the forest of difficulty, unaided. I soon discovered that the trees in that forest had grown yet thicker and stronger. Mr. Spenlow met me at the office door looking extremely grave, and coldly requested me to accompany him to a certain coffee-house near St. Paul's churchyard. We went into an upstairs room, and I found an old enemy already there.
Miss Murdstone, have the goodness to show Mr. Copperfield what you have in your reticule. Thank you. Mr. Copperfield, I believe that is your writing.
It is, sir.
The other letters, Miss Murdstone. Thank you. These two are from your pen, are they not?
Yes.
No, don't give them back to me, Mr. Copperfield. I will not deprive you of them. Miss Murdstone, be so good as to proceed.
I must confess to having entertained suspicions of Miss Spenlow in reference to David Copperfield for some time. I observed Miss Spenlow and David Copperfield when they first met, and the impression made upon me then was not agreeable. The depravity of the human...
You will oblige me, ma'am, by confining yourself to facts.
Indeed. Since I am to confine myself to facts, I will state them as dryly as I can. I had tried to find confirmation of the suspicions I have mentioned without effect. I therefore forbore to mention them to Miss Spenlow's father, knowing how little disposition there is in such cases to acknowledge the conscientious discharge of duty.
Quite so.
On my return after my brother's marriage, Miss Spenlow's manner gave me even greater occasion for suspicion, but still I found no proof until last night. It appeared to me that Miss Spenlow received too many letters from her friend Miss Mills. But Miss Mills being her friend with her father's full concurrence, it was not for me to interfere. Last evening, however, after tea, I observed the little dog rolling and growling about the drawing-room, worrying something. Miss Spenlow gave a cry and ran to the dog, but I intervened, and at the risk of being bitten, I obtained possession of that letter.
Miss Spenlow attempted to bribe me with kisses and small articles of jewellery. That I pass over. After reading the letter, I taxed Miss Spenlow with having many such letters in her possession, and eventually obtained from her the packet which is now in David Copperfield's hand.
You have heard Miss Murdstone, Mr. Copperfield? Have you anything to say in reply?
There is nothing I can say, sir. Except all the blame is mine. Dora did...
Miss Spenlow, if you please.
Miss Spenlow was induced and persuaded by me to consent to this concealment. And I bitterly regret it. But I love Miss Spenlow so much
Don't tell me to my face that you love my daughter.
Could I defend my conduct if I did not?
Can you defend your conduct if you do? Have you considered your years and my daughter's years? Have you considered what it is to undermine the confidence that should subsist between my daughter and myself? Have you considered my daughter's station in life? The projects I may consider for her, the testamentary intentions I may have with reference to her. Have you considered anything, Mr. Copperfield?
Very little, I'm afraid, sir. When I explained my altered position to you, the concealment into which I'd unhappily led Miss Spenlow had already begun. Since I've been in that altered position, I've strained every nerve to improve it. I'm sure I shall improve it in time. Will you grant me time? We're both so young and...
You're right. You are both very young. Let there be an end of the nonsense. Take away those letters and throw them in the fire. Give me Miss Spenlow's letters to throw in the fire, and we'll agree to make no further mention of the past.
No!
Come, Mr. Copperfield. You don't want sense, and this is the sensible course.
I'm sorry, sir, I cannot agree. I love your daughter. Love is above all else.
Very well. I must try my influence with my daughter. Mr. Copperfield, you are probably aware that I am not altogether destitute of worldly possessions, and my daughter is my nearest and dearest relative.
Sir, I acknowledge my error in concealing our affection, but I hope you don't consider me mercenary too.
No. I merely say that you probably know I have some property to bequeath to my child.
I certainly supposed so.
Every day we in the Commons see the consequences of men's negligence and inconsistence in dealing with their testamentary arrangements. So, you cannot doubt that mine are made.
Indeed, sir. I don't doubt it.
If this silly business were not relinquished, I might be inclined to guard my child with suitable protections from any foolish step in the direction of marriage. Take a week to consider what I have said. Confer with Miss Trotwood or anybody with any knowledge of life. Take a week, Mr. Copperfield.
I confided everything to my aunt when I got home, and in spite of all she could say to me, went to bed despairing. I got up despairing, and went straight to the Commons. There was a small crowd outside, gazing at the windows, which were all shuttered. The clerks were in the office, but nobody was doing anything. The chief clerk, old Tiffy, shook his head as I came in.
This is a dreadful calamity, Mr. Copperfield.
What is it? What's the matter?
Don't you know?
No.
Mr. Spenlow.
What about him?
He's dead.
Oh.
Sit down, Mr. Copperfield. Fetch Mr. Copperfield a glass of water.
Yes, Mr. Tiffy.
But how did it happen?
He dined in town yesterday and drove down in the phaeton by himself, having sent his groom home by the coach, as he sometimes did, you know.
Yes?
The phaeton went home without him. The horses stopped at the stable gate. The man went out with the lantern, but there was nobody in the carriage.
Had the horses run away?
The reins were broken, and they'd been dragging on the ground. The servants found Mr. Spenlow a mile off.
More than a mile off, Mr. Tiffy. Water, Mr. Copperfield.
Oh, thank you.
I believe you're right, yes, more than a mile off. Not far from the church, lying partly on the roadside and partly on the path, upon his face. Whether he fell out in a fit, or got out feeling ill before the fit came on, or even whether he was quite dead then, no one appears to know. If he breathed, certainly he never spoke. A doctor was called immediately, but it was quite useless.
I can't describe my feelings at the shock of his death, and the thought of Dora alone and grieving. But another shock was in store. Mr. Jorkins came to the office and enlisted our help. He asked Tiffy and myself to search the office for a will, as none had been found at Mr. Spenlow's house. There was no sign of one in the office either.
Mr. Spenlow was very difficult to move from the beaten track. I'm disposed to think that he had made no will.
But Mr. Jorkins, I know he had.
You know?
The day I last saw him, he told me he had. He said his affairs were all settled.
Oh, dear. This looks unpromising.
Very unpromising.
Surely you don't doubt...
My good Mr. Copperfield, if you'd been in the Commons as long as I have, you'd know there was no subject on which men are so negligent and inconsistent.
But that's exactly what he said.
Oh, I should call that almost final. My opinion is... no will.
There was no will. And even more astonishing, Mr. Spenlow's affairs were in a most disordered state. The furniture and lease of his house had to be sold, and Tiffy, shaking his head, told me that after all debts were settled, he wouldn't give £1,000 for all the assets remaining. My main concern, of course, was Dora. Miss Mills told me that she was broken-hearted, and would say nothing when I was mentioned, but, oh, poor Papa. 2 spinster aunts had taken her off to their home in Putney. I was at a loss, and so I resolved to go and see Agnes and seek her support and advice. When I arrived in Canterbury, I went straight to Mr. Wickfield's house, and I found Mr. Micawber working in a little room that used to be Uriah's office, and looming very large there in a legal-looking black suit.
My dear Copperfield, what a pleasure! What an unlooked-for gift from fate! You wish to see our friend Heep? I will conduct you.
No, thank you, Mr. Micawber. I know the house of old, remember. I'll find my own way upstairs. How do you like the law?
To a man possessed of the higher imaginative powers, the chief objection to legal studies is the amount of detail they involve. Even in our professional correspondence, the mind is not at liberty to soar to any exalted form of expression. Still, it is a great pursuit, a great pursuit.
How is Mrs. Micawber?
She is well, thank you, and so are our offspring. We have been fortunate enough to secure accommodation in our friend Heep's old abode. She would be delighted to see you there. It is humble, to quote a favourite expression of our friend Heep, but it may prove the stepping stone to more ambitious domiciliary accommodation.
And how are you getting on with our friend Heep?
One moment. My dear Copperfield, a man who labours under the pressure of pecuniary embarrassments is, with the generality of people, at a disadvantage. That disadvantage is not diminished when the pressure necessitates the drawing of stipendiary emoluments before those emoluments are strictly due and payable. All I can say is that my friend Heep has responded to appeals in a manner calculated to redound equally to the honour of his head and of his heart.
Oh, I shouldn't have supposed him to be very free with his money.
Pardon me? I speak of my friend Heep as I have experience.
I'm glad your experience is so favourable. Do you see much of Miss Wickfield?
My dear Copperfield, I must assure you that I am charmed with Miss Wickfield. She is a very superior young lady, of very remarkable attractions, graces, and virtues. I do homage to Miss Wickfield.
I'm glad of that.
If you had not assured us, my dear Copperfield, that D was your favourite letter, I should unquestionably have supposed it to be A.
Oh. And what of Mr. Wickfield?
Mr. Wickfield is, I dare say, a man of very excellent intentions, but he is... in short, he is obsolete.
I'm afraid his partner tries to make him so.
My dear Copperfield, allow me to make a remark. I am here in a capacity of confidence. I am here in a position of trust. The discussion of some topics, even with Mrs. Micawber, so long the partner of my vicissitudes and a woman of remarkable lucidity of intellect, is incompatible with the functions now devolving upon me. I would therefore take the liberty of suggesting that in our friendly intercourse, which I trust will never be disturbed, we draw a line. On one side of the line is the whole range of the human intellect, with one trifling exception. On the other is that exception, the affairs of Wickfield and Heep, with all appertaining thereto. I trust I give no offence to the companion of my youth.
Of course not. I've no right to be offended by that.
I took my leave of Mr. Micawber, feeling that he was not quite at ease, and that something had interposed between him and me that had changed our relationship. I found Agnes sitting alone in her own little room, writing at her desk.
Trotwood, how good it is to see you.
Oh, Agnes, I've missed you so much. I don't know what it is. I seem to lack some resource that I ought to have. I need you to supply it.
What resource is that?
I don't quite know, but I must lack something. I get so miserable and worried. You come to London, I rely on you, and I have an object and a course ahead of me at once. I'm driven out of it. Then I come here, and in a moment I feel an altered person. Nothing has changed, but I have changed for the better. What is it? What is your secret?
Have I a secret?
When I come to you at last, I come to peace and happiness.
What has happened, Trot?
Mr. Spenlow found my letters to Dora. He forbade our engagement.
Oh, no.
But there's worse. Agnes, he's dead. He had some sort of attack on his way home.
Oh.
Dora is living with her aunt, her father's sisters. My darling girl is distraught with grief, and I haven't seen her since it happened. There you have it. Now my reliance is all on you.
But it mustn't be on me, Trot. It must be on someone else.
On Dora?
Of course.
Agnes, Dora is rather difficult to... I wouldn't for the world say to rely on, for she's the soul of purity and truth, but I hardly know how to express it. She's a timid little thing, easily frightened. A little while ago, before her father's death, I thought it right to tell her of the change in my fortunes. I told her she'd be marrying a poor man. I asked her to try and learn something about keeping accounts, to study a cookery book. She burst into tears and wouldn't talk about it.
Oh, Trotwood, just your old headlong way. Poor Dora. You needn't have been so very sudden with a timid, loving, inexperienced girl.
Yes, I see that now. But, Agnes, what ought I to do?
I think you should write to her aunts. I would tell them, quite openly, all that has happened, and ask their permission to visit at their house. Don't propose too much. Trust to your own fidelity, and to Dora.
But suppose they frighten her? Suppose she cries and says nothing about me?
Is that likely?
God bless her. She's as easily scared as a bird. And suppose the two Miss Spenlows aren't likely persons to appeal to in that way?
I don't think I'd consider that. Consider whether it's right to do this. And if it is, do it.
You're so wise. You always are. I'll write the letter at once.
And I did as I'd promised. Mr. Wickfield had invited me to stay, but unfortunately I had no further private conversation with Agnes then, for Mrs. Heep seemed to be with us everywhere.
Hold the wool for me while I wind it, Uri.
Yes, Mother.
How do you think my Uri's looking, Mr. Copperfield?
Very, unchanged, Mrs. Heep.
Oh, thank you, Master Copperfield.
Really? Oh, don't you see a thinness in him?
Not more than usual.
Don't you, though? Oh, but you don't take notice of him with a mother's eye. Don't you see him thin, Miss Wickfield?
No, he looks very well. You worry too much.
Oh, thank you, Miss Wickfield. You see, Mother? We're quite a little family now, Mr. Copperfield. Mother and me, and Miss Agnes and her dear father.
I found this a very unwelcome domestic picture. Next day, Mrs. Heep's watching began again, and lasted all day. Towards twilight, I went for a walk alone, but I hadn't gone very far before Uriah caught me up.
Master Copperfield, how fast you walk. My legs are pretty long, but you've given them quite a job.
Where are you going?
I'm going with you, if you allow me the pleasure of a walk with an old acquaintance.
To tell you the truth, I hope you won't be offended, but I came out to walk alone because I've had so much company today.
You mean Mother?
Yes, I do.
Oh, but you know we're so very humble, and having such a knowledge of our own humbleness, we must take care we're not pushed to the wall by them that isn't humble. All's fair in love, sir.
What?
You see, you're quite a dangerous rival, Master Copperfield. You always were, you know.
Do you set a watch on Miss Wickfield and make her home no home because of me?
Those are very harsh words, Master Copperfield.
Put it how you like, you know what I mean.
No. You must put it into words I couldn't.
Do you think I look on Miss Wickfield otherwise than as a very dear sister?
You may not, you know. But then again, you may.
Then, for the sake of Miss Wickfield...
My Agnes. Would you be so good as to call her Agnes, Mr. Copperfield?
For Agnes Wickfield's sake. I'll tell you, I'm engaged to another young lady.
Oh?
I hope that contents you.
Upon your soul?
Yes.
Oh, Master Copperfield. If you'd only had the condescension to return my confidence when I poured out my heart before your sitting-room fire. As it is, I'll take Mother off directly, and only too happy. What a pity you didn't return my confidence. But you've never condescended to me as much as I could have wished. I know you've never liked me as I've liked you.
Uriah.
Yes?
You ought to understand. I believe Miss Wickfield to be as far above you, as far removed from your aspirations as that moon is up there.
Huh? Peaceful, ain't she? Now, confess, Master Copperfield, that you haven't liked me quite as I've liked you. All along you thought me too humble.
I'm not fond of professions of humility or professions of anything else.
There now. Didn't I know it? But how little you think of the rightful humbleness of a person in my station, Master Copperfield. Father and me was both brought up at a foundation school for boys. They taught us a deal of humbleness and not much else. We was to be humble to this person and humble to that, and to pull our caps off and make bows, and always to know our place and abase ourselves before our betters. And we have such a lot of betters. Be humble, Uriah, says Father to me, and you'll get on. It's what goes down best. Be humble, says Father, and you'll do. And really, it ain't done bad. People like to be above you, says Father. Keep yourself down. I'm very humble to the present moment, Master Copperfield. But I've got a little power.
As I saw his face in the moonlight, I knew he was resolved to recompense himself by using that power.